divorce. And it sounds stupid, but it's an important point. Um, Divorce was historically the only way of sort of dissolving a marriage. And divorces were originally religious in nature. They weren't even civil, right? Because most marriages are religious. You had a divorce by the church, whatever the governing authority is. Historically, common law, only the husband could petition for a divorce. There perhaps rare cases of abuse or neglect where they allowed a wife to petition, but that was actually the rarity. That regime has changed, though, significantly in the last 100 years or so. Today, in every state in the union, both spouses are allowed to petition for divorce. But there are different kinds of divorce regimes. I'll just give you a little bit of background. This isn't really in your reading, but you should know. No fault, FALT. You probably heard of this. You always see celebrities and they separate it for reconcilable differences. Right? You always see this phrase. What does that mean? It doesn't really mean anything. It means we don't want to be together. Even law, you get a divorce, you have to have a reason. Usually adultery, abuse, neglect, merely not liking each other, right? Telling your spouse, I don't like you anymore, I want to end this marriage, was not sufficient. That was not enough. The reason why is that marriage is viewed as a sort of sacred union, right till death do us part, designed to keep the family together. So unless it was actually a very good reason for one party was at fault, you could not obtain a divorce. Change again in the 1970s with California, with introducing no fault divorce. That is, one spouse could petition for divorce without any reason, simply saying, "I do not want to be in this union any longer. Right? I don't love this person anymore. I don't want to be with him anymore, etc." That was a huge revolutionary shift because now divorces became a lot easier. Today, I want to just make sure I say this carefully. There's no state that still has fault divorce, right? In every state, you can get divorce, but there's something what's called modified fault divorce. So, for example, in Texas, there's a 90-day waiting period, a cooling off period, if you will. Thinking is, well, maybe they'll reconsider, maybe they'll fall back in love, maybe they'll have second thoughts. It's not like, you go to Vegas, you just get divorced in 5 seconds, right? You have to wait a couple months. In Virginia, where I went a little bit more onerous, there's a 6-month period, up to a year. If you can reach a property agreement, a settlement agreement, you can divorce in 6 months. And if you can't reach an agreement, it takes a full year. So different states have different sort of waiting periods in which you can get a divorce. And again, the thinking is, don't rush this, right? Marriage is supposed to be forever. Work it out, think about it, right? Try to have second thoughts, and then maybe you'll decide to fall back in love and fall back in love and get together for the kids or whatever it is. But I don't know. Shad, do you have a question?
Yeah, the timeline, the 6 days or whatever it is, does that start from when they try to file for divorce or when they get married?
You're getting divorced within 90. So you're asking if you get divorced within 90 days. I mean, I suppose if you get married and you file divorce within the same day, you could do that. No, it's when you file for divorce. I mean, no, there's an annulment. I don't know off the top of my head how many days for annulment. I think maybe a week or two. Anyone know? I mean, it's a very short period. It's kind of like a whoopsie, right? I was drunk, went to Vegas, one of those things. But it happens. But I think no, you would not. I mean, look, people get divorced fairly quickly after a wedding. It happens. Like wait, I would say. No, not efficient breach. All right, guys, we have class now, right? Okay. So far, again, so with the divorces, just keep in mind the issue of fault, right? So you generally don't need a reason to get divorced. Now, if there's abuse in Texas or anywhere else, they can give you a divorce quicker, right? You might even get a protective order, a restraining order against an abusive spouse. So again, this is where there's no fault. Just what, we just don't love each other anymore. We want to go with different people, etc. In the old days, though, you would need adultery or some sort of very specific cause to break up the union right away, and even then it was hard. Statistics, I'm sure you know these, or maybe you don't want. It's very hard to get a precise number because it's hard to track things. But for first marriages, maybe around 40%. For second marriages, about 60%. The third marriages, bless your hearts, about 70%. So more likely than not, either you'll get divorced or know someone who will. Just it happens frequently. When you have property, right? The ideal is when the two spouses work it out by themselves. When that can be done, it makes things a lot easier, right? But often that can't be done, right? Just think about it for a moment. The very fact that you're getting divorced shows that there's been some breakdown in a relationship. Not always. Sometimes it's very amicable, as they say. But the fact that you're getting a divorce shows that something is not good between the two partners. And when you try to negotiate something with someone you like, it's hard. Now try to negotiate with someone you do not care for very much. And you're fighting over not just abstract widgets and Blackacre, but you're actually fighting over marital assets that you jointly acquired. And it often becomes the case that the spouses do not agree. Spouse A says, well, I thought this was our arrangement. And spouse B says, no, I thought this was my arrangement. And again, these people who want to get divorced, their communication isn't always the best. So very often they do what people do is they go hire you all, lawyers, which is a worst thing to do, but it's what ends up happening. And they throw themselves at the court to try to make an award over how to divide the various marital assets. That is, divide, tangible property, divide money, and also to allocate future payments to the various spouses. Historically, these payments were called alimony. Alimony, Alimony. It was a legal term that referred to the husband's duty to support the wife. That term is sort of faded, and now the term we use is called spousal support. Spousal support, and the reason why is because in theory or in practice, both spouses can get payments. It's not just one spouse who gets the payment. Okay. All right. Today's class, I'm going to make this very clear, only concerns common law marital property states. Today's class only concerns common law marital property. We'll do community property states on Thursday, like in Texas and California. But today it's only common law. The rules for divorce are very different, right? If you all get married in the state, the rules can be very different than if you get married in California, New York, for example. I'm sorry, or New York, New Jersey, for example. Okay? In a common law state, in theory at least, I keep saying in theory at least, each spouse has separate property. You're allowed to have that. Each spouse keeps their separate property. If they had a tenancy by the entirety, it gets converted into a tenancy in common through divorce. All right? But at common law, generally the wife had no separate property. It all belonged to the husband, which is why the alimony system developed. Okay, a little bit more. Actually, let's is the polling thing working today? Is it working for you guys? All right, let's do a polling. We haven't done a polling question in a while. All right, I want to ask you a question, and this is deceivingly hard. In one sentence, define, please, marital property. One sentence. It's actually somewhat difficult. All right, another 15 seconds. All right, who's up next? What? I got two hands.
I'll get it.
James?
I'll go after it, yeah.
No, but which way? That way, right? So James and then Max next, okay? Okay, so James, what's your you're both up for this question anyway. James, what's your definition here?
I would say it's property acquired as a couple during marriage.
Okay, what do you mean acquired by the couple? Ooh, what do you mean it had an equal interest in it?
They both had equal say in it.
What do you mean say? You're. It's actually a really hard question. So I'm deliberately giving you a hard time. What do you mean equal say?
Like they both had the ability to sell it.
They could both sell it, okay. And why they both have the ability to sell it?
Because they were in a marriage.
All right, Max, what's marital property? What's your definition? Like a joint tenancy? So we mean jointly owned.
It's depending on what state and what the rules are, percentages of it can be owned.
So let's say the husband buys a car, doesn't tell the wife. Is that marital property?
In certain instances.
What are those instances?
I can't remember the exact terms for the type of marriage or the type of property ownership, but in some instances, the property acquired during marriage is property. It wouldn't matter.
Does it matter if he paid it from his salary, or does it matter if the money came from?
In certain instances, yeah.
We keep saying certain. I'm asking you a question. You keep dodging my question. What are those instances?
There are instances where if it comes from
We're in a common law state. We're not a community property state. Let's narrow it down. In a common law state, if the husband has a separate bank account and he buys a car, is that marital property?
Yes, it is.
No, it's not actually. Right? Stephanie, in a common law state, are the couples allowed to have separate bank accounts? They are. Why are you saying no?
I put for my definition that any property acquired by either spouse is marital property if it happens after the marriage.
That's not correct. Keely, in a common law state, if the husband receives his salary and puts in a separate bank account, is that money marital property? Why not? In a common law state, are the spouses allowed to have separate property? Okay, so last question again. If it's a common law state and the husband has a separate bank account and the paycheck's in that bank account, is that marital property? Okay, now we're on the right track. Okay, so we start with a really broad definition that wasn't quite right. Now it's starting to narrow it. Okay, that's okay. It's okay. We'll make mistakes. It's all right. No, the reason why I do this question because people think it's everything and it's not. In Texas, the answer is different. Again, if it's Texas, the answer would be very different. But in New York or New Jersey, not everything the couple, or I'd say it differently, not everything a spouse acquires during marriage is marital property. Right? In a common law state, not everything a spouse acquires is marital property. Spouses are allowed to have separate bank accounts. Right? Every 2 weeks when the spouse gets his paycheck, that can be deposited in a separate account. The spouse can use that separate money to pay for something on his own, right? He wants to buy a car, wants to buy this, wants to buy Blackacre, he can do that. He does not need the wife's permission to do that. All right. You're allowed to have separate property. You're allowed to. Okay. But it's very hard to actually pull that off, right? If you're married, invariably you do what's called commingling. Commingling. Camille, you know what commingling is? You hear that phrase? What does that mean, commingling? Mingle, right? What does commingling mean?
I guess, it's similar to an independent.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's independent. That's good. But like with a bank account or like with financial assets, what would that mean commingling? Just think that through for your husband and wife, your family,
Both deposit money into it,
and you both
take money out
and use to pay for what?
of expenses that you voted for you.
Shared expenses. Exactly right. So in theory, at least, right, you can keep all of your money separate. In reality, it becomes harder because generally, if you're married, you live together. You don't have to, I suppose, but generally, if you're married, you live together. You might share a home. You have utility bills, right, where maybe you pay for half the electric and she pays for half the electric, or maybe you pay for the electric and then she pays for the gas, whatever it happens to be, right? Invariably, with a couple, money gets commingled. So even if it's earned by a separate paycheck, once you start commingling it together, it becomes marital property. So I mean, it's possible, right? Spouses can have completely separate finances, and they go out of their way to never commingle. But realistically, if you're in a relationship for many years, stuff gets mixed, and if it gets mixed, you can't who's so all that becomes marital property in the event of a divorce. With me so far? All right. You can also have what's called a prenuptial agreement, which you'll study in marital property. A prenup can designate what is going to be the separate property and what is the joint property, right? So maybe one spouse has a house that owns before the marriage, and then you make it very clear in your agreement that the house will not become marital property. But again, if you start commingling funds, you can basically sort of trump the prenup, right? So I'm trying to put this as cleanly as I can. All the best plans that couples make to keep their finances separate often fall apart unless they're very careful, right? Because just in the day-to-day living, you make decisions together about money, and that becomes a joint asset. Everyone with me so far? Yes, Amar.
You said, what about the commingling fund? It can overtake the prenup?
Right. If you make an agreement before you get married, say we will keep our funds, and then guess what? You keep your funds together. The prenup is basically, I won't say nullified, but it's no longer has much juice. Doesn't have much because the parties have sort of moved beyond it. Right? You're not bound by the prenup forever. Right? If you decide to do stuff together jointly, then the funds become joint. It takes a lot of discipline to actually keep finances separate. In Texas, it's a lot harder. We'll do that one next class. In Texas, it's almost impossible, right? But at least in New York, you can do it if you're careful. But it's people generally when they're married, oh, I love you, sweetheart, whatever, and then they pull their stuff together and that's tangle it apart later. Okay. All right. Now, why does the definition of marital property matter in cases of death and divorce? Right? When you're divorcing, the court can only divide up marital property. The court can only divide marital property. If it's not marital property, the court can't chop it up. So if the husband actually kept stuff separate, maybe it's an inheritance, maybe it was a property owned from a prior marriage, etc., it's his, right? The court can't chop it up. But if marital property was acquired during the marriage, the court can divide that. Everybody with me? So defining marital property is very hard. And we'll look at the Graham case in a few minutes. The court really struggled defining what marital property even was. Right? The court, I mean, this is why I somewhat an unfair question to make you do it in one sentence, right? But the court even had some difficulty deciding what, and there was a dissent there as well. Right. Many courts do what's called equitable distribution. Equitable distribution. Okay. Now, you notice what I said was equitable distribution, not equal distribution. Equitable. Right? The courts don't simply say, 50-50, husband gets half, wife gets half. That is not the case anywhere. It might be, but that's not what's going to happen. Instead, they use equitable principles, which means the courts have a lot of discretion. They're relying on my least favorite word, the F word, right? What's fair? Maybe one spouse contributed more to the marriage. Maybe one spouse might need the money more, right? Maybe one spouse had a bigger role to play in the acquisition of the assets. And again, child support's different, right? Again, if there are kids involved, that makes the example a lot more complicated. We're not talking about today. We're talking just between the husband and the wife. They might factor in earning potential. Perhaps one of the spouses, when it got an education, the other spouse stayed at home with the kiddos, right? So there's a reduced earning potential. Alimony was once viewed as a lifelong obligation, that if you got divorced, you got lifelong payments. Today, spousal support is viewed as temporary. The goal is to get the other spouse to be self-sufficient, right? So it's never ongoing. And often, if the other spouse gets remarried, they lose the spousal support as well, because now there's someone else's burden, so to speak, right? Someone else has to pay for them, so you lose that obligation. All right. Everyone with me so far, right? Again, the important points you remember is the equitable distribution of marital property. If it's not marital property, you don't divide it equitably. Right. So on the exam or something else, if I'm asking you a question, you'll need to figure out what is and is not marital property, and then make sure you're dividing up the right things. Yes, sir. I am only talking about common law today. That's said that many times. We'll do community property. The rules are very different. All right. Ready? Move on. All right. Let's do the Graham case. This one's always a little. This one always makes people a little bit uncomfortable, because there's some people who are in the spot of the husband, and there's some people who are in the spot of the wife in these classes. There's some students who are here putting a spouse through school, and schools who are not. I mean, I made this point in the last class. People got a little, but it does happen that a lot of students who come to law school married leave unmarried. Lots of people come to law school unmarried, leave married. So they're law students, and then they get unmarried later. It happens. It's specifically this case sort of touches a raw nerve, because when spouse number one thinks, "Oh, this is great. Let me just sort of suck it up for a couple of years, put my husband or wife through law school or grad school, and then when he graduates, it'll be awesome." And then after you pay all this money, you get stuck with a divorce bill. I had a classmate. He actually turned out quite well, but they had a plan, husband and wife. The wife would go to law school first. The husband would pay the wife's way through law school, and then when the wife graduates, she'd make a boatload of money and put the husband through law school. So husband went to law, was putting the wife through law school. She was about to graduate, and she filed for divorce. After here, he paid basically 3 years of tuition through working, and then he graduated law school, so as an evening student. He's doing quite well for himself now. But this is not uncommon. If you know the name Wendy Davis, she's run for office a few times in Texas. Her husband put her through Harvard Law School. Her kids were back home in Texas. She was at Harvard, and I think the story was, I might be slightly exaggerating, the day the final student loan payment was made on her loan, she filed for divorce. You can Google that. I'm not making it up. I may be slightly exaggerating, but just Google that, right? This happens. Spouses think that they're on the same page, and then they end up not. and then they put in all this money for tuition. Now, my friend actually tried to recover in the divorce proceedings the amount of money paid in tuition, and no, that didn't work. And his wife became a very successful lawyer, making a lot of money, but didn't work. So yeah. Oh yes, Courtney. As I recall, and I'm not 100% certain, that was considered just it was the agreement the husband and wife had, and it was nothing. This was just they had joint assets. They was spending joint money. This was in Virginia, so it was a common law state, but they had commingled assets, and they were just spending commingled assets in the way they chose. Right? There was no gift. That was just the same way if a husband pays for dinner one night, that's not like a gift. It is what it is. Yeah, and I'm not sure you can even contract around that. You think back to the question we did last week of the wife and the husband who made an agreement. If you take care of me, I'll leave the property to you. Remember this question? And the court said, no, that's just the spouse's obligation to care for one another. I think it's the same idea. If the husband decides to put his wife through law school, yeah, and they went to the same law school also. They were they overlapped the law school together briefly. It didn't work. What can I say? What do I know? All right. Usually this topic's a little bit harsher in the evening program as well because it's usually people working. All right. Look, this is okay. The other class was a little more animated with this topic. I'll let it go. All right. It's 9 a.m. I think for whatever reason, the other class is just more active. Maybe it's just people who are tired. I don't know. So people putting their caffeine in for the day. All right. Who am I up to? Oh, yes. I think you're next. All right. My friends, you want to give me the facts and Graham?
Yes, this is a background. Well, they were married, and during their marriage, she was working full time as a flight attendant,
Yeah.
and he was,
Not a glamorous job in the 70s, by the way. This was not a fun job.
and he was working part time because he was also getting his bachelor's degree in alphabet engineering,
Yeah.
and she contributed 70% of their expenses. They also didn't own their own office.
Mhm. Okay.
And so once he started working as a executive assistant, he was filed for divorce. And basically, she wanted to, in the property, she wanted to get like a value of like 2 degrees for what it was worth. And the trial court.
Okay, well, we'll get to chocolate. Very good, very good. Okay, thanks so much, Louis. Excellent. Yeah, no, very good. All right, so let's just take this one step at a time, right? The facts here are utterly predictable, right? Husband, wife, been married in was it 68, I think. The husband then decides to go to school. There are no kids. The wife worked full time as a flight attendant, and she paid about 70% of the expenses. She also did the majority of the housework and cooking and other household chores. Dennis worked part-time, but he didn't really make much money. His main pursuit was education. So they were married about 6 years. And during that time, he pursued a 4-year degree, a bachelor degree, and a master's in business association. Okay. Now, I think Diddy, you next? You're next. Right? So let me we don't know what happened, right? But if you had to guess, if the husband and wife had a discussion about this, what do you think they sort of agreed to between the two of them? What do you think their understanding was?
That she was doing most of financial school while he was taking his
Degree. And then what would happen after he graduated with his degree?
be more.
And then what would that do to the earning potential for the couple? I mean, overall, how much money would the husband be making in the future?
Yeah, I like that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's right. Very good. So, I mean, we don't know for sure, but I'm guessing there was some conversation. There's always a conversation where the husband said, "Hey, sweetie, I have this potential to earn some more money, but I need someone to support me. Will you work as a flight attendant for the next 6 years?" You guys are laughing, but this conversation happens every day around the country, right? will you work as a flight attendant? Going up and down the aisles, doing all this. And it was not a glamorous job. It was it was a hard job. To put me through school, and I did the math. Just as the flight attendant starting salary back then was about $1,000 a month, which is about $50,000 a year in present day values. I mean, not nothing, but living on that with tuition and stuff was wasn't luxurious. Okay, so the wife said yes. Something broke down, right? And it didn't break down until after he graduated. So again, I don't want to be cynical, but the husband wasn't cut off his gravy train until he got to the end of the road. And as soon as he got to the road, we were laughing. He said adios. He said goodbye. And we don't know what difficulties were lying underneath, but this might get a little too personal, but often when you're in a stressful environment, you think, oh, as soon as I get out of the stressful environment, the relationship will be better, right? It's a very common trope. You'll hear this from your friends, right? Like, oh, once I graduate, things will be less stressful. No, give me a break, right? When you guys graduate here, it gets harder. It gets harder. Law school's fun. You get to sit in class and talk and listen and like take breaks and hang out, and professors are fun, or try to be funny at least, right? It gets harder to get out of it, right? The hours are higher, the work's harder, the people aren't as nice. You can't choose your friends, right? You're sort of stuck in an office all day. You can't go from one thing to another. And look, if you don't like me, you got like 3 weeks left. You're done, right? But your boss sticks around forever, right? The people you work with, you're stuck with. So this myth that after you graduate it gets easier it's perverse. It's just completely false. I'm sorry, but it's pessimist at 9 o'clock in the morning, but it's I think I'm right. So whatever reason they thought, oh, we'll work it out, and it didn't work. He got a job making some salary. He was making, I think, $14,000 a year, which was actually, I think, a little, just roughly what the flight attendant wife was making. But I think his upward swing was a higher potential. All right. So they jointly filed for dissolution, a divorce. Right. Neither of them want to keep the marriage. Right. This wasn't a case where partner A says, I want a marriage. I want a divorce, and partner B says, I don't. You don't have to consent, right? Not everyone wants to get divorced, right? You've heard the phrase contested or uncontested divorce, right? When it's uncontested, both spouses agree to to end the marriage. They simply don't agree on how to divide the assets. But you have a contested divorce. Maybe one spouse says, I don't want to break this up. And then that takes forever, because then the court might take years to resolve that. But here they agreed. They both want to move on. Okay. Matilda, did the wife ask for any form of spousal support, alimony?
No,
No. Why did she not ask for any alimony?
I don't know why she couldn't ask for it. She just want the degree so to be divided.
Well, I know that, but under the law at the time in Colorado, was the wife eligible for spousal support?
Yes, I think so.
No, Maria?
She's not eligible because she has a full-time job.
That's right. She was not eligible because she has a full-time job. So under the law in Colorado, it's kind of quirky. If the wife or any divorced spouse who was working, she was not eligible for any spousal support. So it's kind of like a tough situation, right? The wife who's not working can actually get more than the wife who's working. The presumption is if you're able to work, why do you need spousal support? But that matters, right? Because they had no assets except for the degree. They had no house, no home, no mortgage, no retirement account, nothing. All they had was that degree. And she argued that she wanted equitable distribution of the business degree. Right? She wanted equitable distribution of the business degree. So that raises the question, first off, what is the value of a business degree? James, before we get to how they start chopping it up, how do you calculate the value of a degree? I mean, it's a piece of paper. I mean, how much it's worth? I mean, how do you hangs on your wall, right? How do you calculate the value of a degree?
Well, trial court
kind of did something weird here, and
No,
I don't even.
I know what they did. That's weird, but just in the general, how do you calculate the value of a degree? That part's not weird.
Um, I guess you'd guess at how much value that degree is going to bring you
Over what?
over what you would have had you not had the degree.
Correct. Yes. Right. So you can calculate the value of a degree actually pretty not easily, but with some accuracy. This comes up in tort suits, right? So imagine someone just graduated from college and they're killed by a car, and then you want to calculate damages, right? What would their lifetime earning potential have been? You can do that, right? Right. You can say roughly a person with a high school degree versus a person with a 4-year degree. What's the average salary that they expect to make difference over a lifetime? Say you work for 40 years, and then you can sort of adjust it for inflation. People always ask, "Gosh, what's the value of a law degree?" It varies. But so for the good news is that law degrees will make you more money of your career. How much varies a lot. For most people, having a 4-year degree versus a law degree will make more money with a law degree. But the distribution is actually quite wide. One estimate, which was now a couple of years old, is dated, is that a law degree adds about $1 million to your income over the course of your career, which may sound like a lot, but that's over the course of 40 years, right? So it's not as much as if whoa, but it's cyclical. It also varies. Anyway, I don't do this anymore. One year I actually showed the graphs, and I stopped doing it because people don't understand graphs. But for a very small number of people, they will not make more money with a law degree than with a 4-year degree. And that might be by choice. Maybe they do public interest, it's volunteer work. I mean, people choose. Not everyone wants to make big bucks. So I said something like, I wasn't giving. I said, for some law students at the bottom of this graph, they will lose money by going to law school. And I said that, oh my God. No, it doesn't mean people at the bottom of their class will. All it means is that for some people, they choose not to take a career, or they're not able to get a career that's higher than they perhaps have gotten with a 4-year degree. That's all I'm saying. But for most law students, it's a worthwhile economic bet. A lot of work, but you will make more money. Might not be happier, but but you'll make more money. All right. So the court, though, does calculate the value of the business degree. And they say he'll earn an extra $180,000 over the course of his career. Okay. Now we get to where Monica, I'll do this by myself. She'll be on deck in a minute. Now we get to this weird part, right? The trial judge, I don't know, maybe he learned math in Sesame Street. I don't know why he was. I was doing an Elmo book last night. Right? I don't know what he was thinking, but I want to just make sure I understand how he did this, right? So I'm going to write this up. You're going to hate me if you don't understand this. I don't really care, but at least I want to explain it. No, I mean I care, but this is not very important because the court got reversed. So the court says that the husband will make about $180,000 over the course of his career. Okay, and let's say he's in his late 20s now. Let's say he retires in his 60s, so it's about 40 years, right? I'll just say let's say over 30 years, just make it easier. Okay, good. All right. Then he says we need to reduce that to present day value, which is $82,000. What does that mean? There's something called inflation, which if you know what it is, you'll know this very soon. Prices go up, especially in the 70s. Prices were actually having the highest inflation now since the 70s. So $180,000 over the course of 30 years, if you reduce to what it costs today, is at $80,000. All right. Then he did something even weirder. He said, in a given week, the wife would work 40 hours. Okay. The husband would work 40 hours. Would study 40 hours. And the husband would study. Would work. The husband would study for 40 hours and the husband would work for 20 hours. Do you guys study for 40 hours a week? Is that about a good estimate? You should. I study at least 60. I don't know. You're not working 40 hours a week. Anyway, it explains a lot, actually, right? Someone told me, I think when I was in summer, someone said for every 1 hour you're in class, you were studying 3 hours. I think I had that rule pretty solid. Yeah. Anyway, there it is. So he said 40 hours a week for the wife to work, 40 hours a week for the husband to study, and 20 hours. Okay, if you add it up, right? 40 and 40 is 80 plus 20. Okay, so that's a total of 100 hours a week, right? So the total of 100 hours a week going on, right? Total of 100 hours a week going on. The wife has a 40% share of that. And the husband, the wife has a 40% share, and the husband has a 60% share. Oops, wrong symbol. All right, if you don't understand this again, I'm not terribly concerned, but just follow along. Okay, then what did the court do? This is nuts. The court took 40% of the $82,000, which is about $33,000. Okay, with me? And then the court divided the $33,000 over the course of 3 decades at $100 a month. This is insane, right? I mean, it ends up with a very easy number. Oh, wow, $100 a month. It's very easy to calculate. But the way he got there is just nuts. Anyone want to ask me a question on this? Please don't. No, you can. You can. But I just want to say the judge, I think he worked backwards. He's like, well, $100 a month sounds fair. Let me make up this elaborate, I think. How coming with damages is hard. Anyone ever served in a jury? I think I might have asked this before. A jury that has to award damages, that's not an easy job. At least here, there's some numbers to go on. But I mean, this is just absolute nonsense, right? I mean, he actually worked 20 hours a week and studied 40. It's just completely made up, right? But at the end, he awarded $100 a week in spousal support. It's not actually alimony. He considered this an equitable distribution of the assets. Right, one thing. But the courts of appeal and then the state Supreme Court reversed, right? Monica, why did the appellate courts reverse? So all this is for naught, right? If the degree is not marital property, then there's nothing to divide. You only divide what's marital property. Again, if the degree is not marital property, you don't divide it. All right, you only divide up the marital property. Monica, help us out here. Why was the degree not marital property? 5. Okay, that's great. Let's start with 1.
It's not exchange more transferable value in the market, and then.
Okay. Let me stop there. That's good. So, what exactly is a degree? Right? I mean, I know this sounds like a dumb question, but you guys are all here working. In a couple of years, if you do your grades right, you'll get this little piece of paper hang on your wall, right? What exactly is a diploma? Does that what is that? Good. So if you sell your license to your best friend, can she become an attorney? Why not? It's a chattel, right? Isn't it a chattel?
Well, it's just a piece of paper at that point, but the actual value of practicing is.
So if you buy on eBay or Craigslist someone's diploma, that's not going to make you a lawyer? No. Right. You've heard the phrase diploma mill, or you probably heard the phrase. People literally would used to sell diplomas on eBay, and they would just sort of scratch out the letters and change the name. Not eBay, but whatever people use for eBay. A diploma is kind of a weird thing, right? You can't buy it, right? If you just wrote a check to South Texas for $150,000, they would not hand you a diploma. Right? You're thinking about it. Might be easier, right? No, that doesn't work. You have to actually suffer. I'm sorry, learn and go through suffering. It's pain. I know. What's strength through pain, right? It makes you stronger. It does. I know it's painful, but it's for your benefit. I think, at least. I don't know. But diploma cannot be purchased on the open market, right? It's not a commodity, right? It's not a chattel, right? It's not a chattel, right? I think Monica said there's no exchange value. Instead, the degree is personal to the student who received the education. It's personal. Right? Tim, can you inherit a diploma? No. What if, your father dies and you're his heir? Do you get his diploma? I mean, you might get the diploma, right? The piece of paper. But yeah, it's useless. Exactly right. It cannot be inherited. Tim, can you sell or assign or transfer your diploma? Well, again, you can sell it, but you can't actually sell the significance of having that degree, right? Correct. Right. What the court finds is that the diploma has none of the attributes of property, right? It has none of the attributes of property, right? You can't acquire it by gift or inheritance. You can't convey it. If you want to think of it, there's really no sticks in the bundle, right? It's something that's personal to one person and cannot be inherited or transferred. A piece of paper can, but not what comes along with it. Right? The court finds under Colorado law, the degree itself is not marital property. And other courts in Connecticut and New Jersey reached the same conclusion. Now, Brock, did the wife really want to argue that the diploma itself, the piece of paper, was marital property? Was that what she was really arguing? What was she really arguing here?
Basically, she deserved proceeds from his diploma.
Well, what do you mean by proceeds?
Like what he was going to receive after.
Correct. Yeah. What she really wanted was saying his future earning potential was increased because of her hard work, right? Because of the work that she put into the marriage, his future earning potential was increased. And she wanted a cut of money he had not yet made. But Brock, is money he has not yet made marital property? Can it be? Can money acquired after divorce be marital property? Right. So I mean, that's the rub, right? She wanted to do something that you couldn't do. Why is this table right here? I was walking to it. Actually, I found out you know what this thing is? This box. You see this thing? It's Professor Stevenson. It's this COVID box or something, right? It's like a fan and filters and supposed to clean the room. I don't know. I asked him what it was today. I had no idea what it was. Okay. Anyway, I only recently figured out what that thing was. CR box. That's what a CR box. I can't remember what CR stands for. So she basically wanted a future cut of his earning potential, but that was not marital property. So she tried to create this creative argument that the degree itself was marital property, and the court rejected it. The court rejected it and said, no, that's not marital property. And because it's not marital property, it cannot be divided. And again, she could not get spousal support because she worked. And Colorado law did not permit her to receive spousal support. Okay, now there's a dissent, Tyler. What did the dissent say here?
Basically, that it would be justice. Look at the actions and means of it. It would be an injustice that she contributed 70% of her money and earnings to this degree.
Well, let me just push. Why is this an injustice, right? I mean, I want maybe play devil's advocate for a minute here. The wife wasn't an idiot, right? She could have realized that divorce happens and that her loving husband may decide to bolt on her, right, and decide to just dump her. So she know what she was herself into by going into this arrangement. So then, where's the injustice? No, I mean he definitely not do her. He did not treat her. I'll say it better. He did not treat her well, right? He did not treat her well. But didn't the wife, knowing validity, she was knowing capacity, right? Didn't she know what she's getting herself into? Right. So I think what the dissent's saying here is that this is a sort of common situation where the doting spouse, usually the wife, puts the husband through school, thinking that everything's gonna be awesome, and he deceived. We don't know if he deceived her. Maybe he simply changed his mind, or maybe he said, "Wow, I like being away from my spouse for all this time at school. Maybe I don't want to be with her anymore." Right? I mean, it happens, right? Because when you're in law school, you don't see your family, right? Maybe you do. I don't know. But you have to make decisions of what you want to spend time with. And this is a business degree, which is not nearly as hard as a law degree. Let's be frank. I don't even know what a business degree is, right? It's just the figure of this program dwarfs what you have in an MBA. It's just right. Yeah, I want to do a joint degree. It's yeah. Anyway, but the dissent says this is a not unfamiliar pattern. The wife sacrifices a more secure family financial future and works to educate her husband. What is the wife's reward? What should she have done? This is dreadful. Well, prenup, sure, but what else could she have done? She quit her job, but also that risks her career. She could have contested the divorce and waited a couple years till they actually started making some money. Look, I mean, so what she probably didn't realize was when she went for an uncontested divorce, she probably didn't know what was going to happen. Maybe she did, I don't know. But had she stuck around for a few more years, she could have gotten more because she would have had a higher income. Anyway, but she got where the Tyler is. I don't want to say that word, right? But that's what happened. Okay, and the dissent would have made the degree itself marital property. All right. I think we covered everything I want to cover in this case. Any questions on Graham? It's a good case, but it's like it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, right? John's in hand. That's him.
In the dissent, it sort of reminds me of unjust enrichment.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Right, but the idea of unjust enrichment is you have two parties engaging in an arm's length bargain. Think back to the case with the husband and the wife and the made an agreement: if you take care of me, I'll give you the property. The court didn't view a married couple as sort of arm's length bargaining partners. They consider them as a unit. And if spouse number one decides to work her butt off with spouse number two through college, that's their agreement. That's not like a separate duty of consideration, right? There's no separate obligation. Yeah. And this is why how you view marriage really does matter. The sense, like, come on, let's be real here. The wife was working, going up and down the aisles, serving drinks to, obnoxious guys, while the husband's sitting there, studying the library. She did all the housework, all the cleaning, etc. Any other questions? Yes, sir, Ben.
Oh, well, it's not she went and always like making more money.
Yeah. They bought a house, yeah.
Right, and but is there any effect that like a bad day waiting would have on her ability to recover? Or,
A bad faith staying in the marriage, or staying in the marriage for the purpose of making more money.
Yeah.
Try and prove that. Right. I think the court would say, good, you tried to make the marriage work. You reconciled, you went to counseling or therapy. I don't know what she did, right? I think it'd be really hard to prove that she stuck around for more money, right? The presumption is you should stay married, right? So I think it'd be hard to show a bad faith there. In fact, the bad faith is probably the husband who dumped her, but the second he got his degree, right? That's the bad faith, if anything. Right? I think at least. I don't know. Any other questions on Graham? Okay, this case is always uncomfortable in the night section. Always, it's maybe a little bit easier in the day section. Okay, I'll let it go. All right, there are a couple cases in the notes afterwards. There was one case from New Jersey. By the way, when it's Mahoney, it's a domestic case, right? When it's the first name and both names in the caption of the case are the same, it's a domestic case. It's always going to be it. Like Gruen versus Gruen. Remember the painting case? Anyway, some domestic case, they're related. The court held in that case a professional degree is not marital property. There was a New York case, though, O'Brien, which held that a medical license was marital property, but the legislature overruled Court of Appeals. So in New York, again, a degree is not marital property. There used to be a case in the book, they took it out, and I wasn't happy about it, by an opera singer, Frederica von Stott. I'm saying her name wrong. And the husband basically quit his job and became her coach and manager, and managed this opera diva for all these years. He left his job, etc. And then they got divorced. And there was a huge debate about whether he could recover the sort of time and effort he put into her career. And that was different because he actually left his job, and the court was able to let him recover some of that. It wasn't like a degree, but he was her coach and manager, so he played a role in it. Here, I think it matters that with a degree, you're not supposed to get help. I mean, you get help perhaps indirectly, but it's a degree you earn on your own. So I think that's a little bit of a difference. All right. One more case I want to mention. This is actually a Texas case. This one's a little bit sad. There was a guy who was convicted of a number of rapes and sent to 25 years in prison. DNA later cleared him. It wasn't him. So he spent basically 25 years in prison. It wasn't him. He went to prison married. And at some point during the marriage, during this prison term, the wife divorced him. By the way, if your husband's in jail, that's a ground for divorce. I know, don't laugh. It's true. I mean, you can't serve you can't get him in court, but you can obtain a divorce if your husband's in prison. Okay, so the state though gave him about $6 million for wrongful incarceration, and then the ex-wife comes along and says, "Aha, community marital property." What was that? You saying no? Well, the husband was like, "Screw this! You dumped me. I'm not giving you a penny." And the question is whether this was a Texas case, went to the Texas Court of Appeals about whether the compensation received for wrongful termination was marital property. Ultimately, the court held that it was not a compensation. This was a remedy he received because he was wrongfully convicted and wrongfully incarcerated. The wife gets nothing. So again, even money you get during marriage when you're in prison doesn't always go to the spouse. Okay, questions so far? No? That usually generates questions. Okay, move on. All right. You have a reading on dower and courtesy. I'm not going to cover it. I will not test you, and I promise. It's basically been abolished in every state. I don't care. Right? It confuses people. So if it's in your notes, that's all I need to know. I will not ask you. If on the exam your answer is dower and courtesy, you're wrong. Right? That's fair game. If that's what your answer is, that's not what I'm looking for. So just be done with it. The next topic, though, is actually much more important, which is the elective share. The elective share. Okay, what is the elective share? The elective share arises in a situation like this. Spouse number one dies. We read his will. And it turns out that the spouse number one left nothing to spouse number two, or left spouse number two with very little. That usually comes as a surprise, right? You don't usually tell someone, "I am writing you out of my will." In fact, you might deceive them. Maybe you had an older will in which the spouse was taken care of, and then you secretly, quietly make a new will. You do not need to show your spouse your will. There's an obligation. You do not need to put your spouse with the county. You don't have to register it. You can keep a will in your safe or your lawyer's office or wherever you want to keep it, under your bed. And people may not find out until you're dead. But it happens, right? Leave nothing to my wife. It happens. Then spouse number 2 can choose what's called the modern, oh, that's really small. The modern elective share. The modern elective share. The reason why it's called elective is the surviving spouse can elect to take it, right? With the modern elective share, the surviving spouse says, you know what? That's a very nice will. I want door number 2. The surviving spouse can opt out of the will. Okay? With a modern elective share, the surviving spouse can opt out of the will, can choose a different path. Okay? Now I'm going to make this one very clear. The modern elective share only exists in common law states. I put this in capitalization because people forget this every year. The modern elective share only exists in common law states. Texas, no, does not have a modern elective share. California, no elective share. All right, so the exam questions in Texas don't give me elective share. It's wrong. You've been warned. Okay, so what is the elective share? The surviving spouse can renounce the will and say, I don't want this will, and take 1/2 or 1/3 of the marital property. And I'll get to the 1/2, 1/3 later, which one it is. But the surviving spouse can renounce the will and take 1/2 or 1/3 of marital property. Okay. And 1/2 of the 1/3 depends if there's kids or not, right? If there's no kids, it's 1/2. And if there are kids, it's 1/3. That's the same rule that we studied a few weeks ago, right? If there's no kids, then the wife can take 1/2 elective share. And if there are kids, the wife can take 1/3 elective share. Yes, Amar. Oh shoot! I'm sorry, you didn't tell me. I've been doing this from. All right. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Now it's in there. I'll clean up section 8 later. I'm sorry. Thank you for telling me that. I'm sorry about that. There it is. Better? I'm sorry. You guys gotta tell me this. I'm sorry. I apologize. At the wrong tab. All right. Again, with no spouse, with no children, it's 1/2. With kids, it's 1/3. All right. So let's take a look at this question. Makes me Kyle. All right. So Kyle, let's see you in a moment. Okay. So let's read it. Question number 2. Okay. Husband dies in New York. Common law property state. He and the wife have no children. Okay. During his life, the husband takes out a $60,000 life insurance policy payable to wife. The husband has a daughter from a prior marriage. Okay. Who receives the $60,000 life insurance policy? All right. There's a multiple choice. Question number 2A. Put your answers in, please. Does the wife get it or the daughter from the prior marriage? Okay, another 10 seconds or so. All right, Kyle, let me ask you a question. Are the payments from a life insurance policy paid before or after death? I know it sounds like a dumb question. It's actually important, right? With a life insurance policy, you don't get the money until you're dead. And actually, it's not until you're dead. It's usually dead plus some period of time because they have to investigate to make sure the person actually is dead, that there was no chicanery, if it wasn't a suicide. There are various reasons why an insurance policy may pay out. So then my question for you, Kyle, is the proceeds of a marital property, is the proceeds of a life insurance policy, is that marital property? He's already dead. Does a marriage survive death? No. Okay. As soon as they're dead, there's no more marriage. So is this $60,000 marital property? Who gets it? Why to the daughter? Who is the insurance policy payable to? Okay. So who gets it? Why did you say daughter? But who is the insurance policy made payable to? So what's your final answer? What did you put, John?
For the same question?
Yes.
Why?
Why you put wife?
Because it's paid.
Okay, that's right. Wife gets it here. That's what we did. Okay, so who put D? That's not an option. People are ridiculous. Okay. Okay, yeah, so 90% of you put A, that's correct. But the important point here is that the insurance policy is not marital property. Right? The insurance policy is not marital property. Why? It doesn't come into existence until after the marriage. Because the marriage is dead. Right? The marriage is over, the husband's dead. So here you can designate who gets it. But be careful, right? This is actually very important. If you make your insurance policy payable to someone who's not your spouse, the spouse can challenge it, especially in Texas. We'll do that in next class, right? If you have a life insurance policy and it's payable to someone who's not your spouse can contest that and may seek a cut of it. We'll do that later. All right. So the next question asks about Whiteacre. Okay. For 2B. All right. So I tell you, husband and wife bought Whiteacre with $60,000 as joint tenants. Okay. Who receives Whiteacre? Who? And speak for Helene in a moment. I think that's with everybody. All right. Helene, let me ask you the question. Is Whiteacre marital property?
Yes.
Okay. So who gets Whiteacre when the husband dies?
So, because of the right of survivorship.
Does the daughter get any percentage of Whiteacre? Correct. Don't get tripped up here, right? This is old. This is what we studied 2 weeks ago. The wife gets Blackacre and fee simple by the right of survivorship, right? Sorry. The wife gets Whiteacre by right of survivorship. The daughter gets nothing. All right. You want to say, oh, doesn't the daughter get a third or something? No, daughter gets nothing through survivorship. Now, if this was a tenancy in common, Shadi, how would that question differ? Let's say the husband and wife title is a tenancy in common. What would happen then?
It is Heritable, that's right.
Inheritable. You could inherit it. Yeah. Who would inherit? What would again? Let's say it was a tenancy in common, Shadi. Who's the heir here? Daughter. Don't say joint tenant. It's a tenancy in common. What would the daughter be?
And then common.
Correct. With? Correct. If I change this question for you, just be aware of this. I can do that. And I said this was a tenancy in common, the daughter would stand into the husband's shoes, and the wife would now be a tenant in common with the daughter. Again, it's the daughter from prior marriage. Everyone with me? Margot, you're next. All right. So, yes, John.
Just to clarify, so why here, what is the marital property here? Because it wasn't a joint tenancy by the entirety.
Ooh, that's not a thing.
Oh, sorry, tenancy by the entirety.
You don't need it. The tenancy by the entirety doesn't really matter. The only upshot of the tenancy by the entirety is you can't sell it independently, right? A couple can have a joint tenancy; they're allowed to do that. They're married, right? But the reason why this is marital property is actually bought together with their joint assets. Yes, Lillian. Yes, it does matter for the next question. I won't say why, but it will matter for the next question. In other words, the husband and wife had no kids themselves. And that will matter for the next question. All right, so then we see the third and fourth bullets. The husband has a savings account worth $100,000. That's not husband and wife saving account, it's just a husband savings account. That matters. And the husband's will leaves all of his estate to his daughter by first marriage. Now again, the life insurance policy is not part of his estate. It only pays out after he's dead. The joint tenancy is marital property. So the survivorship kicks in as soon as he's dead. So even though he leaves a will, that does not affect his life insurance policy. And the will does not affect the joint tenancy with survivorship rights. But does it affect the $100,000 bank account? So this is question 2C. This is your question for the day. Of the savings account, will the wife receive? Again, he left her nothing in his will. $0, $50,000, $66,000, or all of it. $100,000.
Factoring in the fact that they have a daughter.
They don't have a daughter. Daughter's from prior marriage. That's in the question. They have no children. It's in the question. Don't assume a husband's daughter is from the same wife. Don't assume that. So Maury Povich is going off the air. It's his last season. Sad. Yeah. Are you the father? No, you didn't. No, that's probably what's going off the air. Yes. You said about Maury? No.
For this question, we're assuming that she's just like taking the will as it is. Like she hasn't.
I'm asking you a question, guys. Yeah, stop with the follow-ups. You got some follow-ups in a minute. On the exam, you can't ask me follow-ups. If you do, we're in trouble. All right, Margot, my friend. Let's do this question. What'd you put here?
I said B.
Why'd you say B?
Because the wife has no kids, so she can renounce the will and take half.
Under the what's that thing called? The modern elective share. Exactly right. Okay. So Lillian, I dodged your question before because it matters, right? The answer here is B. Wow, a lot of you thought you took 0. Who put 0? Why 0? Anyone?
I thought it was separate account, so like it's just like money.
But she can take half.
was just assuming that we were taking the will, because it didn't say that she was taking the electric share, so I didn't.
But the point of the elective share is she can choose to opt out. Well, look, well, so if you have a choice of taking 0 or 50, you'll take 0. Okay, you know what? So if she takes the forced elective share, how much would she get? Yes. Right. Okay. So here's what happens, right? And let me just make this point clear. The father's estate, right, is all the money he has. Court can actually come in and sweep even broader, things that are not marital property, right? Even if the money was not marital property, the court can still come in and sweep half of it. And this is designed to avoid the situation here where the spouse moves assets around so it's not for the wife's benefit. And they can still give half of everything to the wife upon death under the elective share if there's no kids. The wife can take a third. But without kids. So basically the wife can take half. And what this means is that if you're in a community property state where everything's sort of community property, and your a spouse dies, you get basically half of everything. If you're in New York, a common law state, without community property, you still get half. So what you see is the courts have more or less approximated. The courts have more or less approximated the same result. Whether you're in New York or Texas, and a husband dies and he writes his wife out of his will, the wife's gonna get half. Right? The courts have more or less created a treatment that it doesn't really matter what state you die in. That the wife can still get about half, the surviving spouse gets about half. Make sense? Yes, Shadi.
She gets half, she modern like share.
Correct.
This person did nothing, then why do we get everything?
Yeah, I mean, look, if the wife doesn't elect to take her share, I've never had anyone ask that before. Ollie's been teaching this. Usually, I mean, this is not awful, but you're a spouse and you just got screwed in the will. To use Tyler's word, you got nothing in the will. Usually, you're pretty upset, but maybe you're not. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you say, "I don't want the money. I don't want his money," right? And then it goes to the daughter. Yeah, it's creative. All right, Amar.
In the question, it also talked about if she took the will, she would get the white acre, right? So would she then?
Well, the will, the white acre is without regard to the will, right? The point of the right of survivorship is it kicks in immediately. There's no probate. There's no waiting period, right? So the insurance policy pays out after the death. It's not marital property. The survivorship right is independent. It pays off immediately. The question of the $100,000 is because the elective share, the court can basically look at all the assets and basically give the wife half. Yes. So under the elective share, the court can sweep very broadly. And they can basically make sure that it's designed to avoid the wife getting nothing. And the court can actually reach assets that might not be marital property. Yeah, Will. With the elective share, the court can sweep very broadly. There might be certain exceptions for inheritances and otherwise, but generally it's a very broad sweep. Oh, I'm sorry. My head, Matilda. Yeah, yes, go ahead, Matilda. Did I write that? I'm sorry. Okay. It's not wrong. The technical terms of probate estate, they can take basically everything that's in the probate, which is generally the marital property, but they can include other things as well. So let me revise my notes. I'm sorry if I misled you. Thank you, Matilda. It's usually the marital property, but you can actually sweep even more broadly than that. But it's the broader probated estate, and this is actually on page 447. It's in your book. I think I changed the numbers a little bit, but this same question is on page 447 in your book. Okay. Yes, Ryder.
So in the event that there's a child from that marriage, from the man and the wife, prior to his death, the child dies, does that child have a future interest in possibly some of the probate estate?
No, a dead child is not an heir. So no. Right. Well, we're going back to the question of his children, right? He might have children.
So let's say the child from the man and wife, the child dies.
Right.
Although the child is no longer heir, the child is dead, the child still has an interest within that estate during that marriage, right? So
What interest does a child have in the marriage?
maybe I
Well, the elective share, right? So the wife takes $50,000, right? In this question, the wife takes $50,000 in this question. What happens to the other $50,000? That will be divided up between the daughter and other heirs because he has a will. But let's say the husband had no will, you wouldn't have an elective share, right? The reason why you have an elective share is the husband has a will in the first place. If there's no will, then the wife would take half anyway. Right, because again, we did this before. If the wife dies, if the husband died intestate without a will, the wife would take either half or a third. Right, so what the elective share does is you basically can't opt out of that. Right, with the elective share, the wife gets what she would have had if there was intestacy. Lillian, kids from that marriage, correct? Right. In this question, there's a child from a prior marriage. That still puts you in the half bucket, not the third bucket. Courtney. A child's a child.
There is that third, since this child is dead, that they have like two surviving kids. So the grandparents of the marriage, or the grandkids of the marriage, would they inherit that third?
I think you saw the third. If husband and wife had children, and those children have children, then I think you're still in the third bucket because the marriage produced children. Shadi?
Married with their own kids are minor. Share, like, child segregated, but something separate trust.
Right. Yeah. So let's say there's the wife and a minor child. The wife gets half, and then the minor child would probably get the other half in the trust or something. All right, Brock. Last question. Well, no. It's not that kid gets a third. If the will was to a daughter, the daughter will get the 2/3, remaining 2/3. Let me try this one more time, right? We discussed a few weeks ago what happens if a spouse dies intestate, his wife gets half, right? That's like the default rule. What the modern elective share does is it recreates that. It says effectively, husband, you wrote your wife every will. That's not very nice. We're going to come in and take half, forced, whether you want it or not. And if you go look on page 447, it discusses you go beyond just a marital property. You can look at the entire probate estate, whatever assets they have. All right, questions? Yes, Courtney. Right. Well, again, the elective share kicks in where the husband writes the wife out of the will, right? So let's say the husband says, I give nothing to my wife and everything to my daughter. The wife comes in and takes either half or a third off the top, and then the heir in the will gets the rest. The daughter will get whatever's left over. The wife can take elective share of a third if the husband and wife has children. But there's no requirement that the child from that marriage gets anything. The husband can still leave it to a child from a prior marriage. It's the current spouse that gets to take the elective share. Make sense? Good. I'll see you all in class on Thursday. Thank you so much. So